Okay, anyways, yeah, my class was something like this. We were talking about the soul. We'll try to see if we can get anywhere with this, but we were talking about the soul. And what we were talking about was how we started with Rav Sadia Gaon. I don't remember which we were. What we basically came to is, and all the things that I say are not only historically in Rav Sadia Gaon, they're also like things that are actual now also. What we came to is that there's a way of thinking about this which has a certain a certain demand for the soul, which is, you could see it as very constricted. It's very local, a very small problem. For example, in Rav Sadia Gaon, what is the soul for? It's for receiving reward and punishment, right? Which, because reward and punishment sadly doesn't happen in one life, we need it to survive death. But that's basically all the entire criteria for soul is basically that. And I think that's what most people most religious people also think of the soul as, for the most part. In other words, what would happen if you take away the existence of the soul? What would happen is that you can't have schar v'inish that survives death, basically. I think. Not true? Not really in anything else.
It's necessary for the ends.
But we're getting. But for most people, that's the only point of it. Which also defines what kind of soul they're looking for, as we discussed. Of course, it's somewhat connected. It's somewhat connected to the general idea of the universe that you have, or your general metaphysics. We saw in Rav Sadia Gaon also, but his general metaphysics is also sort of only interesting to him for religious needs, in the sense of that he needs the world to be created, he needs it to be mechudash, right? He needs it to be created in time, in some sense, because that's the only way he understands creation. No. But and therefore the soul must be a created thing also in the same sense. But the whole reason he needs that is sort of to have a creator God, which he could then worship and so on. It's not really. In a certain sense, he's not really interested in the. We discussed this, right? In a certain sense, at least, he's not really interested. Him and most other Jews are not really interested in, doesn't wonder about where the world came from. He wonders, do I have a hechsher from science to be a good Jew? You know, so he got that hechsher, and now he's a good Jew. One sort of application that we get from this, third thing where we see how this is small or very limited area of thought in a sense, is that his discussion of soul, and here I come to something very important, although I don't remember if we discussed him in a different way also, but something very important which already Aristotle noticed in his discussion of the soul. And interestingly, the Rambam sort of notices but tries to get away from this problem. The Ramban in many places, compares the traditional view of the soul with the Greek view precisely on this point, what he sees as the Greek view anyways, which is that the normal soul, the Rav Sadia Gaon soul, for example, is only concerned with the human soul. Because the whole point of it is for humans to be able to have schar v'inish and so on, so therefore there's no interest in anything else, any other kind of souls. Which would mean two things, by the way. One is, doesn't mean any animal souls or any plant souls and so on, that Aristotle does have, we'll have to get to. And the same thing doesn't mean any kind of Platonic world souls or separate intellects and so on, which again, at least Plato has and Aristotle sometimes has. Not interested in that, and that's not interesting. You know, people nowadays sometimes go around saying, do animals have souls? But in general, people don't believe that animals have souls. Descartes didn't believe that animals have souls for similar reasons. He doesn't really care. He doesn't need that for whatever. For a system to work, it's not interesting. He also doesn't think it's true, but it's not interesting for him. So that's one big difference. Rav Sadia Gaon does have a complication with this, where he says sometimes that animals have reward and punishment. But okay, I don't know what to do with that. That doesn't work with this difference that I'm setting up here. But we discussed last time that he doesn't care about the animals having reward and punishment in the sense of having being like some kind of person or agent that has reward and punishment. He's just worried that it's not fair that some animals suffer, so he needs to give them some compensation for that. But that's the extent of his concern with that, really. So it's again a problem of theodicy. It's not really a problem of, where do animals go when they die or something. Okay, stop. I don't know how to stop all these things. Okay, it's nonsense anyway. The fourth thing, which is also important, and there's also a slight, Sadigun, like in everything else, does have some place where to hook things like this if you really want, is that the soul is, like we said, is only really relevant for, well, basically when you die. That's when you start thinking about it in this sense. There's nothing, makes no difference when you're alive. It makes no difference in the other sense. It makes no difference in your ethical life, or what we call aveda. It makes no difference that you have a soul, really. In other words, whatever you are, a person, you're gonna have to be a good person, and the good deeds that you have sort of are chal on the soul, or on the person, which is a soul and a body for him. But they're not. It's not really. He doesn't have the soul as an integral part of his ethics. In other words, neither in a Platonic nor in an Aristotelian way. Meaning to say, if you're a Platonic way, you see ethics, the entirety of ethics, as trying to become more soul and less body, which is what you find in a lot of Ksidrem and so on, and some Mishisfurim in some way.
Does he think the connection to Schar V'Einish of Neshama is like, it's just a historic, it's like an extension of you, and then it goes, the history, your history comes back to you, or you actually...
Or?
I'm saying the way you were saying it last time was that it actually changes. So it's more about...
Yeah, so that's what I said. There is, that's the point that I said, we do have a place for him. But in general, what he says is he just needs a person to survive or to resurrect in order to be able to receive his Schar V'Einish. He does then go on and say that when you do mitzvahs, then your neshama becomes light or becomes dark, and he has this language.
So Schar V'Einish will be a present. Whatever you are presently is what your Schar V'Einish will. If you die, at any moment you die, that.
Yeah, you want the soul if you could continue to do mitzvahs when you're dead. No, you can't, because he thinks that souls can't do anything without bodies. Don't have action without body.
When it separates, right?
It can't do anything. It's inert.
Would there be, let's say, you could get like Einish on your Averis, or then Schar for mitzvahs, or just whatever, those things all add up to an equation and something. And that's the result.
That he actually discusses if the subject of Shiva has to do with this. He generally does think, that's the whole Ma'amar. That's a good question, but I don't. If we should do a shir on Shiva based on this and see where he developed that, because you have to read Ma'amar Rav Sadigun's fourth Ma'amar for this, basically. Fourth one, where he sort of makes a very long list. I think it's the fourth one, either the fourth or where he makes a long. No, it's actually in the fifth Ma'amar, where he makes a long list in which the Rambam takes over in Hilchos Shiva Perek Gimel in his own way. It's in the fifth Ma'amar, where he makes a very long list of kinds of people. Tzaddikim, Rishaim, Bainim, and bigger Tzaddikim and bigger Bainim, and so on. He has 10 levels. And he seems to put Schar V'Einish into those categories. So it's not really detailed and we have to read that. I don't know. Basically, we have to look in that. And that's where he gets into Shiva, where Shiva is like changing you from one kind of person to another.
Right. So
puts you from one category into another category.
It's just you just changed it.
Yeah, there's something to be thought about here. I just don't know what it is.
Nafina is the truth the other way. That's not.
If you can become a Risha, you for sure could.
Yeah, it's a parak nechespa.
Yeah, that also. But that's okay. But that's another shir. That's another shir. But for the Sadigun, back to how he sees the soul. This is all before he discusses the soul. So he really doesn't connect these two things. The only thing, again, he does say this kind of language where the soul becomes better. The thing is that we have to remember one important thing. The thing is that for Rav Sadigun, and this is again for normal Jews in that sense, this at least in this aspect of his thought, because his thought is not consistent, just like anyone else's, but even less so than other people. So it's not really fair to start trying to consistentize it. I don't know how you say.
Propose consistency.
To cohere it, and too much. But I think that he very clearly has what we could call like a heteronomical view of what a person is to do, because he very clearly has at least mitzvah sichlis and mitzvah shemias, but he at least has the category of mitzvah shemias, which is a lot. He actually tries, in halacha, for example, he sort of tries to promote that category over the other category. For example, the Chavos of Avos, which is a student of his, student, not directly, but accepts his theology, is entirely the other direction. He totally doesn't really care about mitzvah shemias. He says, and that's really where you should focus on. But the Sadigon is more or less totally in the opposite direction, at least in Halacha Lamasa. And therefore, and he sees the main point of a person as what he calls nishma, listening to God, or not listening in the sense of hearing, listening in the sense of
obeying.
Yeah, obeying. So obeying doesn't really, when you have a theory of doing good as the good as obeying, like divine command, like the Euthyphros theory, the priest and the Euthyphros theory, then you don't really have. It doesn't really matter what happens to your soul, because it's only accidentally connected to your soul in a certain sense. It's not like making your soul better is what the mitzvahs are about. It's that a soul can do things. One of the good thing, or at least one of the good things, is to listen to God, and for that it becomes light and so on. But it's not, you're not going to really have a causal account of that, because it's just external to you. It's just accidental to what it is to be a soul. So that's why really, if it only, and again, he has the other part where he talks about metasichlias. If you want, you could, all these things exist in his thought, but in general, like he's, at least in the aspect where he's like a push to eat, then a traditional Jew, which Chazal definitely think in this way for the most part, then it's, the soul is not important for the avodah, because it's not becoming more of a soul or making your soul clean. It happens to be that the soul is going to be the subject of your mitzvahs navayis, but those mitzvahs navayis, so that good and bad is really good of obeying or not obeying or disobeying. It's not really the good and bad of pertaining to the soul as a soul. He doesn't have that way of thinking at all. So yeah, so back to what I was saying. So these are like sort of three very important, I'm just saying it so we have the clarity. There's these two different theories that do have that, right? So there's the Platonic theory, which has the point of ethics as becoming, and well, there's different versions of the theory, but as becoming more soul and less body. We could say it sometimes it's more rational and less irrational, like it says in the Republic. Remember the three souls, where only one of them is rational, and that point of is to make the rational one. Or you could have like more theological descriptions that he has, where it's literally getting the soul back to the God where it came from, in the Phaedrus, different places where Plato has this language. But in Tzad HaShuva Shebeneim is that the point of being a good person, or the point of is to become back a soul, or more a soul and less a body, or to conquer the body, or to all kind of different brutum that we could get into that, which you get in Chavis Lavova sometimes, and in Chassidus sometimes, and so on. For that, you definitely need a soul. For that sense, the soul is the first point of anything. And or we have the Aristotelian theory, which doesn't really need to say this subtle. Well, sometimes Aristotle gets to this, and sometimes Aristotelians say that, things like that. But in general, Aristotelian ethics, at least most of it, until you get to contemplation, which is really about the intellect and not about the soul. But they talk about ethics as becoming what you could be, or becoming what you should, right? Completing yourself in the sense of actualizing potentials, which is basically what the soul is. So in that sense, to understand what a soul is really important to understand what ethics are. For the primary source for this would be in the Rambam, for example, in Shemana Prakim, where he feels the need to explain the lower parts of the soul, mostly over there, right? And not the rational part, which is a totally different situation, but which gets us back to a Platonic way of thinking. But at least the lower part.
Rational for Rambam is a pretty small category, right? What we would call rational
doesn't
make the cut.
Right. But most of ethics, in other words, most what he calls in Shemana Prakim malas hamidus, most of ethics in the sense of what we do, not in the sense of thinking, is going to belong to the lower part of the soul. Well, basically to one part, which he calls the chilik HaMesayres, the will, or something like that.
With Admiration, right? He says that.
Yeah.
It's a das. He didn't get.
But nowadays, what we call ethics, what Jews call ethics for sure, right? In Midas Tovis is totally concerned with the part of the soul that dies, whatever. Okay, we'll get to this. But in any case, the point is that for both, again, that's why I call this Platonic, but there's a Aristotelian account of the higher level that I just discussed, but at least they're Aristotelian, like the Rambam says, and that's not literally in Aristotle's language, but it's their people's language, where they talk about a healthy soul and a sick soul. where, in other words, just like to be a doctor, to know what a healthy body is, you need to sort of understand what the body is for and what's the function and what it does. It's the same sense in the soul. If you need to know what all the various powers of the soul are for, in order to know which is a good one and which is a bad one. So you would need to know what eating is for, to know if a person is eating well. In the same way, you would need to know what anger is for, to know if you're being angry well, or you should never be angry. That's another confusion, or things like that, or all the other virtues that we talk about. But all these virtues only make sense after you agree that there's a soul. After you, in other words, this kind of thing that a soul is
powers of that species or item, right?
Right. So not in Aristotle's ethics, or in Rambam's ethics, again in the lower part of the ethics, are contingent on understanding of what a person is, or another word of saying what a soul is. And because to be a good person is just to be a good person in the sense of this organism to fulfill its function and so on. So we need to know what the function is and what it's for in order to have ethics. And that's just, again, that's not what you need. You don't need that for a traditional Jewish ethics or for a traditional religious ethics. You don't need that at all. Because you don't need to know what...
characteristic powers of it.
Yeah, you don't need to know what kind of thing would make a person a good person in the sense of a good person. A good person is whatever it says in the Chumash to do that. That's how you become a good person. So that's another way in which, for ethics, because you people care about ethics. For ethics, it's very important to have an account of the soul, and the Rambam literally does that and copy-pastes an account of the soul in the beginning of his one of his ethical treatments. Because he thinks that otherwise you're not really understand what he's talking about. Very interestingly, by the way, in Mishnah Torah he doesn't do it, and I don't know why. Because the corresponding part of Shemona Perek in the Mishnah Torah is Hilchos Da'is, and Hilchos Da'is is totally. We have to think about this. This is a question for you. No, it doesn't give you spoil at all. Yeah. It does. It sort of makes the whole thing about this mitzvah Valachta b'drachav, and
it is a noteworthy,
which is not really what Rambam thinks Valachta b'drachav is, because of course being like God is not having good midas. Not really true for the Rambam. It's only true. This is a big question, but anyways, mostly being like God or being close to God is in the sense of thinking like God, like the Rambam has in this first chapter in Maida. And it's very interesting that in Hilchos Da'is he totally ignores the idea of this being. Well, he does say that he does quote the idea of it being choli nefesh and so on. So there is, it is there.
It's a reif and nefashis, right? And
yeah, he does in Perek Bayis does talk about choli nefesh and so on.
Reif and nefashis, by the way, I never knew.
You mean with a specific person? I don't know.
No, I'm saying what makes a person a reif and nefashis? Psychologist?
No, obviously not.
Right.
An ethicist, a person or
the idea seems
or a halachaist.
He doesn't seem to go to tzaddik.
Well, that's what a tzaddik is. I don't know what you mean by a tzaddik.
Okay.
Tzaddik, not in the sense of a tzaddik that listens to God. A tzaddik in the sense tzaddik that does justice. The Rambam translates tzaddik, at least again in the ethical sense, in the end of Maida. Tzaddik is someone who does justice to his soul. Very weird translation of the word tzaddik, but that's the Rambam's translation. So tzaddik is someone who does justice by his soul, which means he gives it justice is to give each what it deserves, and what your soul deserves is to be a good soul. In other words, to fulfill the functions of a soul, and that's what a tzaddik is. So that's a tzaddik. I don't know.
That's not the most problematic definition.
No, it's a nice definition. It's not very liquidy, but it's a good definition. I'm just saying that's who the Reif and Nefesh says. Reif is also not only in the sense of healing sick; it's also in the sense of knowing what health is, right?
Right.
Okay, but he doesn't. But he mostly doesn't. He definitely doesn't give an account of the parts of the soul like he does in Shemona Perek and so on. So that's an interesting question. Why he skips that here? I don't know why. But anyways, these are my list of 4 points. So now, that's what I wrote down here. That's what I'm just reading you. I'm not reading, but just telling you. So now we need to go back to the beginning of everything. Go back to the beginning of everything and try to see how important this is, and slowly get to where we need to get to, wherever that is. So I started from the beginning. That's what I quoted you here, and I started all the way from the beginning, and I said, so this is another so again, the first question that I always want to ask and everything is where this belongs. Aristotle is actually the one that teaches us this very it's not only a very methodical way of doing things, it also has a meaning. because like in the beginning of every book, he's like, well, which science are we doing now, or where does it belong? Like, and he always has in his mind, which later people figured out somewhat more clearly than you see in the books itself, but he always has in his mind some sort of structure of all human knowledge, of all knowledge, and basically of the universe, to which the structure of knowledge should correspond, because knowledge is knowing what exists. And always wants to know, okay, where's our address right now? Like on this tree or structure or whatever of all there is to know. Where are we right now? And this is actually, I discussed this already, right? As the Abarbanel noted in his book on the Ikrim, this is the biggest thing that Rambam learned from Aristotle, one of the biggest things. Because this is something that includes, it does not only about like specific thoughts, it changes everything that he says. In other words, when he does halacha, he tries to organize it the way Aristotle would organize a science. Even the smallest level of halacha. Sometimes he's successful, sometimes not. That's another discussion. If he's always as successful as he thinks he is, probably not.
Well, in organizing the halachas.
Yeah, I have a lot of comments on his organization. I could do better. No, but not saying I could. But you could always claim that he can do better. But he definitely has in his head some kind of structure of how things should be organized and what the science of things are, what the correct order of things is, and it's very important that he spends time with this. You have to remember, the Rambam, for example, the Rambam in Akademia of Pesach Mishnah spends time, like 2 pages, on describing what the logic of the order of the Mishnayos are. And he's probably the first person. I mean, you could find some shtiklach Gemara that asks these questions, but they're just wasting time over there. They don't really care about those questions. I think the Shalom already noticed that, other people have noticed that all those like Tanam Hechikoy and so on, they're not really trying to organize the logic. They're just like spending like I don't know, just spending time like another diak that you could have in the Mishnah. It's not really, they don't see that as primary in any sense, that's for sure.
It's not consequential for its own sake.
Yeah, they don't care for the organization. Yeah, very low, exactly. It's not like, well, what is this subject here? And the subject, it's not only that, but the answers that they give are never good answers if you care about the actual organization of things.
Like, this is why the conversation went. We're talking
because exactly, sometimes, exactly.
Right.
But Ma'acha said, we happen to be talking about this, so let's continue.
Whatever, right.
Sometimes very like associative. And there's a lot of discussion if that's actually how that works, but the point is the Rambam is one of the first people, or at least maybe the first person, but I think that this is a very tricky thing, because when you have in your mind this kind of categorization of how things need to be categorized and organized, it's almost impossible to see out of that. So the Rambam is definitely not one of the people that knew what he doesn't know. Remember what we discussed? He's not one of those people. He's very sure that this system of thought that he learned is the only one and the only way you could ever think. He knows that many people don't think it, and he has a theory of why, because they're just stupid. But he doesn't realize that this is all kol zachnas, that you could bracket this whole thing and say, well, whoever told you that the universe is organized in Aristotle's tree? He doesn't ever have that doubt. He has a lot of very small doubts, and I think that's very clear, and that's why it took it's not as simple at all. That Abarbanel makes this criticism. I think is the first one to explicitly have this criticism. Yeah, I think so. And it took a long time for people attack the Rambam for not being firm enough and so on, but that's worthless. That's like whatever. That's not saying anything. But everyone else either accepted or you can argue in a lot of details. Well, how could you say this kind of dogma and that kind of dogma? But to realize the kind of things that I want to realize always in the end of every inquiry, that this all is necessarily true if you accept these categories of thought. I think that, like I said, Abarbanel makes a comment like this. Even he probably didn't really follow through on it, but he does make such a comment where it's like, well, the Rambam said in the end of his book, it's very beautiful, in the end of his book on Ikrim, he wrote this whole book to justify the Rambam's list of 13 Ikrim. And then in the end he says, well, this is all what the Rambam thinks, but let me tell you now what I think. And I think, whoever told you there are Ikrim? Where did you get this idea of there needing to be some kind of tree with a root, like a basic principle where everything comes out? Well, yeah, that's true in math. Like, the Rambam thought that he has to Euclidicize Judaism. Who said? You don't have to. There's no need. It doesn't work like that.
Has the Kreskas doesn't work
No, Kreskas actually, not only that Kreskas doesn't work on similar lines, he's in the total opposite way. Kreskas is 100% thinks in Aristotelian categories. Well, he has a lot of criticism on the physics, which he thinks are not necessarily true.
The
but
circle thing, right?
He has, I don't know, details. Yeah, that's what you learn in the video. But no, he has a lot of good criticisms of the physics, but the categories he doesn't have any criticism of. And not only that, he actually attacks the Rambam. He's the first one. Like I told you that I think that the Rambam's organization is not as good as he thinks it is. Rav Kriskas is the first one that makes this criticism. He says, according to your own criteria, see, the Chachma is not to say, Rambam, you're shaygitz because you read Greek, so who cares if it's in Greek? Like, tell me what you want. He's the first one that says, yeah, I actually read the Greeks. Well, he read it in Latin or something. And they don't make sense, and by their own criteria, they're wrong. And a lot of its criticism of the Rambam is that the Rambam's own categories are not good enough by their own criteria. So I don't think he gets out of thinking it this way at all. And not only that, his book actually suffers from
categories.
Yeah, I also see the need. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying his actual book is structured in a rational Aristotelian way, a lot more than the Rambam's books are structured. If you read Ar Hashem, it's one of the most people hate it because it's way too structured. It's very hard to read for people nowadays who don't like this or are not used to thinking in this way. But it's a very scholastic book, extremely scholastic. Probably the most scholastic Jewish book is Ar Hashem. And they even use scholastic terminology, which almost don't exist in any other Jewish works. But besides for that, he's just organized in this really Aristotelian way of organizing things. So he's not. Okay, anyways, back to where I am. So Bekitze, I don't know how I started. So basically, so the Rambam thought that he has to organize everything. And, what was I starting to say? Now, part of his organization was, that's where I started. Now, he always says, so that's what's very important, that's what I'm trying to get at. Very important, whenever you read him, you need to figure out what he's trying to fit into what. Like, he has all these pieces of matter, and it's trying to give them a form, like he's trying to put them into a puzzle, make the puzzle work. And if you don't notice, like, where the pieces of the puzzle are really sticking out of the side, and what the form that he has in mind to stick them in, and where he's getting stuck, then you don't really know what he's doing. I think that's true for almost everything he does. And you can't read him in a simple way. You have to realize that he has like a certain frame where he's pushing things in, and then you have to know what's behind the frame in both ways, both in the tradition that he inherits from Judaism, all the halacha and everything that he needs to push in, and also the thoughts that he inherits from, the philosophical tradition. Now, saying that, so the Rambam in Mishnah Torah, that's why that's one of the things I didn't bring the Moira here, but if you read, he has these three major books, the Rambam, and each one of them has its own principles of organization. And sometimes he says the same things and they seem very different, and I think a lot of the difference is just that he's speaking through a certain frame here, and therefore he has to put it in that direction. It sometimes looks backwards than the other way, but if you understand the thought, he's basically saying the same thing, he just got to it from a different angle and so on. So now, for example, Mishnah in Pirush Mishnah, he has almost no. Besides for trying to be mefarish the Mishnah, he doesn't really have all his essays in Pirush Mishnah are totally random. In other words, he has permission to speak about whatever he wants. Even in the Mishnah, sometimes he says, "Well, now I'm going to go off on a tangent," and sorry.
Is just that.
Yeah, it's just essays. But he does sort of try to fit it in as a preface to Masechtas Avos, which is ethics and so on. He does actually do a lot of work in Shemana Prakim to make Prikavos fit into the ethics. That's actually his explicit framing over there, and that's why a lot of things are there. And so on. So, for example, the concept, the thing that we have to get to in the end of this subject, which is the intellect being the part of the soul that survives death. The place we talked about in Perish Mishnah is in his famous Akdama to Perek Chelek, where he got into it by like a discussion of Schai V'Onesh and what is the ultimate human end and so on, and he sort of gets into it in a very backward way from the perspective of how Aristotle, how I would get to it. And then one other place where he sort of does the same discussion is again on his third Akdama, and his Akdama to Mishnah, where he starts talking about the human end in another way. But also he's trying to like explain, and he's totally on a tangent over there. It's like I'm explaining it, and like and so on. It's like all a whole just schmoozing and telling you a whole schmooze. Make sense?
Yeah, I think it's like done with the chelik. He's trying to. I think it doesn't think it really makes sense. What is it? It's just this statement. Everyone gets like, why?
Yeah, I understand that, but he also. You're right, but he's also. Yeah, it's true, but it's not. It doesn't have any much to do with Masechtas Perek Chelek. Like, really doesn't. even in the Rambam's on the view of Perek Chelik, it doesn't end up connecting back.
The mission that talks about, let's say, Tchias Mason.
Yeah, I understand, but he doesn't really get back to explain the Mishnah according to his principles or anything like that. And when he gets to the Mishnah, he just very weakly.
All these, if you have these things, then you're Yisrael.
Yeah, basically, yeah. But that's like Buddha saying Goel. That's like the guy that had a drish on Parshas Korach, which is cat. Like it's a very weak drish. Like it doesn't really. When he goes on to say Apikoris, and then the Apikoris in the Mishnah ends up not being the Apikoris that he discussed. Like there's a very big problem in the how do we call it? The tefirah. You could see the threads of him connecting the two fabrics, and the seam is not very seamless. The seams are very they're sticking out over there. But anyways, let's get back to where we are now. Mishnah Torah is actually his most mature, organized book ever. So that, again, Modern Nevuchim, which is deliberately messed up, so nobody knows. But Mishnah Torah is where he has his like big organization, which he probably worked on the most time in his life. And his big organization, his big idea of organizing the Torah, besides for the idea of making Ikrim, which he sort of abandons in Mishnah Torah, doesn't abandon the ideas, but he abandons that organization. At least in the way that he did it in Perish Mishnayos. But his big idea is to organize everything in mitzvahs. And that's a very big, discussed this a lot of times. It's not Milvan Me'elav, it's not what anyone before him thought in this, nobody before him thought in this way, very few people after him thought in this way. Most people nowadays look at this, for example, the Rambam in the beginning of every halacha has like this list of mitzvahs, right. And both people are like, whatever, what do you want from my life? And I read the whole Sefer HaMitzvahs and like, this all like seems to be totally theoretical, makes no difference to anything. How many mitzvahs are, what is a mitzvah, and so on. But for the Rambam, it makes all the difference in the world, because at least because of this, at least because there's more reasons, but at least because he's trying to like impose order on this huge chaos called Talmud, and he has no string to start hanging things on. And finally, at the end of Masechet Smach, well, he's not the first one. There were earlier attempts, which the Rambam criticized as being very weak, because those attempts are still in the Talmudic mindset, like whatever, it's a 630. Okay, let's have a list. The Mahag does have some reasoning in his list, which the Rambam totally ignores, but most of the other lists, and if you read like the Piyutim, which the Rambam criticizes probably correctly, they don't even care. They're like, yeah, it's a nice thing to do on Shavuos. Let's repeat all the mitzvahs. And everyone has his own version, and every year he has a different version. Even if Sadiq is not consistent, he has 3 Piyutim on the mitzvahs, and they're not all the same. Sometimes they're different. You can always you can make a shtickle Torah for everything if you want, but basically they're not as systematic as the Rambam. I mean, he's criticizing them for that correctly, but also incorrectly because nobody cared about this whole system before him. And so, like every criticism in the world, right? From your perspective, like Reb Kefege's kashas, like if you understand his assumptions, then his kashas are always correct. The problem is that the assumption is wrong. But from his perspective, he's always right. Aristotle does this all the time to everyone else. He criticizes Plato because according to my idea, you're wrong. Well, yeah, but your idea is just your idea. Right? And everyone else does the same thing. And everyone worth reading, the people that they're not, are just messed up. Basically, so the Rambam, now, but this is actually a very major thing that he does. He has this Tarek Mitzvahs, and he does all this work, and I'm telling you, this is like a multi-decade project of the Rambam. It took him a few decades, at least 2.
He's learning full-time there. That's the point.
Yeah. Yeah. Like in Perish Mishnayos, he's already starting to do this, but not in the sense of mitzvahs. He's starting to get into his head that he starts literally when he's like 17. He starts to get in his head, and he's doing Perish Mishnayos for a reason, right? He's trying to put everything back into the Klulim, forget about the Talmud, let's get back to the Mishnah, just the basic things. But then he figures out this idea of mitzvahs, and he tries to put the whole Torah into mitzvahs, therefore, and something very weird happens from this, because most of the Torah is not mitzvahs. And that's why we have these lists. And every halacha, he starts with mitzvahs aseh kach v'kach, and then just goes on to copy-paste a list of halachas that seem to belong to this mitzvah in some way. And very, very often it's not clear, okay, is this part of the mitzvah? It's just a random thing that you think is analogous to the mitzvah. Is this really something is this even something you have to do? Because it seems like mitzvahs are the things that you must do. They're the obligation. Everything else is whatever. I don't know. It's good ideas or whatever it is. It's not clear what makes an obligation. If it's not a mitzvah, if his definition of an obligation is a mitzvah, it has to be the Rayas even, and so on. So what's going on? But that's his big idea. That's in general. That's Klal Gadol. Now we have to relearn Sefer HaMadda, which is one of the big things. Now, in the Rambam, and he says this explicitly. This is here. I'm not even doing any conspiracy theories. This is all explicit in the Geras Tchias Mesim, where the Rambam describes how he has an agenda, One of his agendas is to teach all these Jews that only know Hilchas Miktzah and so on, and halacha and other things. He wants them to know some philosophy. He wants them to know some truth also. And why does he want them to know this? There's something backwards. He says it because it's a mitzvah, but the way I'm presenting it, it's really the other way around. He makes it a mitzvah because he wants them to know it. So why does he want them to know it? Just because it's the truth. I mean, that's why. Because if you read Aristotle, it turns out this is what a person has to do with his life. Know these things.
As big as the radius.
Right. So it's not. It's not because it's a mitzvah that he wants them to know.
Yeah.
But and that's really why in other places he doesn't. In Ikrim, that's why there's a very big difference in Ikrim. And again, this is one of the things that I've discussed over there and others. The Ikrim are not all mitzvahs. Only some of them are mitzvahs and so on, which is another one of the problems when you do this kind of organization. But in Mishnah Torah, he very clearly tries to put everything into these mitzvahs. Of course, he has these groups of halachas, which are technically thematic groups of mitzvahs, right? So they're mitzvahs, but they also have like some theme where like Hilchas Sikkahs, well, Hilchas Sikkah is one mitzvah, but many halachas are, Hilchas Avodah Zarah is 51 mitzvahs, which he decided all sort of belong to this subject of Avodah Zarah. So why some halachas have a lot of mitzvahs, some less? So this is something that he doesn't entirely have a good teretz for, but he makes this book of mitzvahs. And now that he has a book of mitzvahs, he needs to find somewhere where to teach people philosophy. So his big idea, and this is his big idea. Many people seem to have accepted some of it, but nobody really accepted it in the way that he thought of it. Is to make knowledge of everything a mitzvah. Which mitzvah? There's a bunch of them actually, but at least so basically Sefer Hamada, most of Sefer Hamada, probably all of it actually. I think all of it. It's literally called Sefer Hamada, the book of things that you should know. Now these are not things that you do. Well, there are very few things that you do in Sefer Hamada, like. The weird thing that he put into Sefer Torah is don't destroy Shemus of God. Just somehow decided it belongs in that category. But other than that, there's almost nothing that you do in the whole book. There's only things that you should know. Hilchas Talmud Torah, which is basically learn. So that's also not something that you do. Well, he puts in respect for Talmud Chum and so on. Basically nothing in here is really about doing anything. It's really about knowing things. So he has a long list. There's like 100 mitzvahs basically almost, which are just about knowing things. He discusses this in Shemona Prakim, that he thinks that there are mitzvahs of the intellect, which is a very big chiddush that he had, and that's another discussion. Anyways, now we have to get zoom in onto where I am now. He basically, if in the most general sense, what you have to know, in the most general sense, Rambam thinks you have to know two things known as Masa Bereshis and Masa Merkava, which he already translated in Berish Mesnai, Chagiga as physics and metaphysics. And of course we need to know what exactly those things mean. But anyways, those are the things that you have to know. That sort of includes everything. And so as far as knowledge, important knowledge goes, there are other things that are part of knowledge, and he has these different descriptions of why they might be important to know as a ladder to that, or as something that comes out of that. But for the most part, that's what you have to know. And the Rambam, in the most explicit sense, wrote that all down in the first 4 chapters of his book. And he explicitly says here, in the first 2 chapters, I give you Masa Berkava, and the second 2 chapters, I give you Masa Bereshis. And it's what he has to know. Now, what was his excuse for telling you that? His excuse was that it's a mitzvah. Which mitzvah? So, firstly, there's a mitzvah of Mitzias Hashem, of Yidiyas Hashem, Minna, however you want to call it. That's also a mitzvah that he was mechadish. Nobody before him thought that there's such a mitzvah. And many people after him didn't think, but many people did. That was actually one of the things that worked. People were convinced that it's a mitzvah. Because it's very tricky to think that it's not a mitzvah. But Rambam really means that the mitzvah is to know.
Tricky to think that it is.
Yeah, but nobody really, that's logical problems that nobody really cares about. But besides for Rav Kreskas, and even he doesn't really care. He still thinks that you should know. It's only, not really. Only halfway. No, the Ramban's a different problem. But the Ramban mostly accepts the Ramban personally. Okay, the Ramban personally accepts the Rambam's idea of it as being a mitzvah. Actually, he's one of the people that accepts it. He does not accept it in the Rambam's way. That you have to realize. He does not accept that it's a mitzvah to believe in God. He does not accept, and he even accepts that mitzvah being primary to all the mitzvahs in some way. He does not accept it being knowing God in the way that the Rambam understood it. In other words, understanding what God is.
How we do it, right? B'tachim that Hashem is whatever.
No, I don't think the Ramban has b'tachim. No. There's other Rishonim that have things like that. Ramban is more Rambamistic and less than that. No, I don't think so. But okay, that's not where we're learning now. Now, that's one mitzvah. Then, but the real place the real mitzvah where he decided that he can copy paste all of science is the mitzvah Havas Hashem, Havavir.
Right.
And the Rambam decided, based on misinterpreting a certain Sifri, that because the Sifri said Havas Hashem, how? That's what it says in the Sifri. And the Rambam decided that must mean Master Bereishis and Master Mekah, because it's like a Sechel Yeshetem, or from Milchas Mikta you're going to know God. It's not possible. So it must mean that. That's basically the way his mind is working here. So very not convincing if you're out of his frame, but in his frame it's very convincing. And therefore, and he says openly, that's what he says in Perek Beis and Lecha Beis, Lefi Advarim Ha'ele, because the way to do Havas Hashem, so in other words, he doesn't think that Havas Hashem is a mitzvah of loving God. I think that Havas Hashem is a mitzvah of knowing God, which sort of leads to some kind of...
Bria, right?
Well, through what else are you going to know it?
No, but if that through natural processes, not even through like cognition of it.
Through knowing God, and to the extent that a human being could know God, which means knowing everything.
But not internal contemplation.
What do you mean internal? Of what? Yes, internal contemplation of what there is to know.
I thought it's much more immediate.
Not of?
I thought he says he should be mistakel ala bria, and then he'll come to love God, right?
Yes. He actually says, he doesn't say he'll come to love God, by the way. You know what he says?
So
he'll come...
Fear him. Right.
No, he doesn't say that either.
That's what he says.
No, read it. It's not here. What he says is, it's. I didn't quote that part because I'm just an academic,
right?
Yeah, no, I didn't quote that part. What he says is, you will want to know God. You'll
right.
You will receive a will to know Him, and knowing Him is back in the same circle because it just means understanding creation. Well, it also means understanding God. It's not entirely true that it's only about understanding creation. That's just his way to get to God. Really, God is the first chapter, which is knowing God and Himself. But we get to that from His actions. So it's not really that He's replacing knowing God with knowing something else. He's just saying that the way to do that is to know there's something else. And therefore, so there's mitzvah Havas Hashem. Havas Hashem doesn't mean loving God or having a feeling of loving God. It's like a kasha that we get later, like how some people ask, well, either I love Him or I don't. He doesn't really have this question because to him, Havas Hashem explicitly is a certain action. It means take your time to study. That's literally what it means. Lefichach, you need to think, and that's going to cause you to, maybe.
Study or the knowledge that does it.
Yeah, that's two levels. There's study, and then after you study, you have knowledge, and then you have contemplation. It's three levels.
Everyone before him, from Moshe Rabbeinu, all the Nevi'im, let's say, all had his physics.
That's a different discussion. But he thinks historically. No, he thinks that they should have, at least.
He says that
they should have. If they didn't, that was a problem.
Let's say they didn't have it. Right, that's what I'm saying. Is it inherent that you have to know those specific things? Or is it the search for...
No, you need to know the truth. Let's forget, you have to take this historicism out of the thing. You need to know the truth. You need to know the truth of how things are, to the extent that it's possible.
You don't
to the extent that it's human possible. It's all these things are interesting because they're true, not because they're...
No, it's not because of the history, but the point is that if you held that it was Aristotle's one who thought of the science, whatever. So how did we have Nevi'im? They didn't know these things.
No.
Is it searching for this knowledge? Is that the
Firstly.
Or did he hope they knew this?
No. I don't think he wants to answer this question. This is framing the question in the way that the Rambam doesn't think. That's why it's not possible to answer it. Because the Rambam doesn't. Oh God, I could give you the answer, but it's not going to say anywhere. I could give you the true answer even without it saying it's the Rambam's answer. This is the wrong way of thinking about everything. I don't think anyone would agree. The Rambam definitely can't agree with that. That's a very weird thing to say. That having mistaken knowledge of the universe is going to lead you somewhere because he had good intentions or something like that. That's stupid. I mean, that's definitely not for the way that he thinks. Because then you might as well go back and say, well, just tying your shoes in the right way gives you the same thing. That loses the whole intellectual demand, right? You could say that good intentions are good enough, but that's not his theory. That's everyone else's theory.
No. So basically, he would say, "Hey, Shai knew my physics." That's how you would say.
No. But wait, no. So wait. I didn't say that. No. What you can say is, well, they tried. Well, of course they deserve... he quotes Aristotle even at this. A few times Aristotle says we deserve praise for trying, and man should try to know even if he's not successful. Something like that. But But the point, and Aristotle,
only because
the point of this,
success, right?
right? Of course, the point of the reason wanting to know is to be praised is not because there's some god that goes around giving lollipops for good intentions. It's because it's a good thing, right? Because it leads you sometimes, at least, or in part, at least, to correct conclusions.
What else are you gonna do?
Right. But in other words, if you would stop, if you would not praise it, you would never do it, so you would never get to the truth. But yeah, but you can't say that people get truth from that. So what's the problem? The small problem here is the historical problem. The historical problem, which is sort of composed of these two things that both of them, the Rambam sort of knew, or only halfway knew one of them, but probably knew he wasn't that stupid, which is, number one, that, well, there's one basic historical problem that we could say that is definitely a question that you should ask, right? Which is that, are you proposing this theory of, let's say this theory of prophecy, but this theory of truth as the thing underlying a specific tradition, where you never really went around and proved that this is what that tradition meant? This is the basic question, which is the basic question that Ram asks, his basic mevucha of Mod Nevuchim is basically this, right? The contradiction between what we know to be true and what's received as true and is not. That's the basic contradiction. So you can't pretend that he just didn't realize that. He was just very naive and really thought that Moshe Rabbeinu was Aristotle. But the real answer, and there's no real way to answer this question. I said this thing through here. The real answer to that question is only that it doesn't matter, because it can't matter. In other words, I think that the moment you have this orthodox frame, where you're trying to defend a particular person at a particular time, having known the truth, you're already not interested in the truth. That's a very not interesting question.
The Rambam goes backwards. Does for metaphysics this? He does do that.
No.
Doesn't learn Cheskel his metaphysics.
Yes, he does do that. He does do that. But one second. But let's just say it doesn't. But it doesn't.
He's curious,
but that's for a different reason,
right? Not the prophet itself.
No. Firstly, the Rambam explicitly. No. But one second. Let's just understand the point. It's definitely not possible that we have to tie ourselves to defend a certain person at a certain time, knowing certain things, where the proof is going to be that we can interpret his saying in light of those things. That's dumb. I mean, the Rambam also knew that that's dumb. Doesn't make sense. I mean, in a certain, it's only dumb from a certain. By the way, this is very important to notice. Okay, I'm not going to say that, class. It's only dumb because we have a certain perspective on hermeneutics. But in at least in a certain more basic sense, it's dumb because you're defending something that's not. I'll give it to the Aristotelian, the Rambam's sense of this being dumb. It's dumb because you're defending an accidental truth, and you're putting way too much weight on accidental truth, and something that's not necessarily true, which is not interesting. The whole point of being a smart person is to know things that are necessarily true and eternally true. That's the whole point of everything, and by definition, that's the point. That's what at least Plato and Aristotle thought. Of course, you could say that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't think this either, but there's no way for him. There's no way out of this. That's the whole point of being a smart person. That's the whole point of knowing God in that translation. So therefore, there's something very wrong with historical religious belief, not because it's not provable, but because it's accidental. In other words, because the world could have been differently. Yes, because it's contingent. Because the world could have been differently. Because this man named Moses from Egypt or Midian, wherever he came from, born in Egypt, grew up in Midian, this man conforming to a certain criteria of anything is not something any smart person should ever be interested in. Rambam explicitly says that history is a waste of time.
Yeah.
You should never read history. It's something for women to read when they're in the bathroom or something like that. It's just a waste of time.
People who read the Torah historically is these are the people that stop pressing.
I don't mean that. He explicitly says that reading what the kings did and so on is a waste of time.
But he's definitely critical of this. Of Torah historically.
Doesn't say that over there. But anyways, it doesn't. I'm not talking about reading the Torah again. History is a waste of time, because all of human history is history of things that could have been different, and that no smart person cares about things like that. The Rambam goes so far to say that you shouldn't care about your daughter dying, right? Because she could have died. She always could have died. So it's eternally true that she could have died. Happens to be that she did. Okay, good morning. Doesn't really help people that are sad.
I'm getting at
But
it.
he
What
says
is the
that.
necessary
Didn't
truth
help him
in
with
physics?
his brother
That's
either.
A little bit it did.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, of course.
But my
He
question is,
survived.
what is the necessary truth for knowing physics? That's what I'm getting at. Like, would he feel necessary if he wanted to explain it? Whatever. I don't know if he does or doesn't.
Well, he thought that
thinks for metaphysics, yes, right? He does the Yitzchok, whatever he thinks. It's not the point. The point
No,
is,
but
this is-
so
if you get a nevuah, you would get my necessary truths, right? That's what he thinks. So I'll get the nevuah. I'll say this is what the nevuah was. So would he say that for physics also, or is there a different way to frame what necessary?
I don't think I don't know that there's so I don't know that there's a difference in that sense. In other words, I don't know why you want to make a chiluk between physics and metaphysics. I think that what you want, I mean, people nowadays like making this chiluk. I don't think that chiluk is as salient for the Rambam in general, because his metaphysics only works. There's not really two such things. Of course, you could talk about details. You could talk about things in detail. We could say he by the way, he almost explicitly says that Yitzchok made a mistake in physics. People notice that. He says that Yitzchok thought that the spheres make noise and they don't. So he definitely did, and he also knows, and he uses this in his attacking philosophy mode, but he also knows that Aristotle made mistakes in astronomy. So not only he knows, the tradition that he comes from, everyone accepted that Aristotle's astronomy was incomplete. So it's not a question that specific pieces of information can be wrong and starkly wrong, and then it's not really interesting what Aristotle thought. It's just interesting what the truth is. But I don't think that this sort of question, and I think that this sort of question where it's like, what if, I mean, the question that people nowadays ask is go something like this. And I think that it's a good question, but it's a better question, even though it's a much better question than people realize it is. Because there's no way out of it. Meaning to say, when you ask a question, well, Rambam said that are some Greek book. Turns out that Newton said that Greek book is nonsense. So it turns out that Rambam said it is nonsense.
I was trying to not do it that way. I was trying to do it backwards instead of forwards.
I know, but that's the same question.
Yeah.
But now the problem with this question, again, if you're in the Rambam's frame of thinking, if you accept certain very general assumptions of his thinking, you don't have to have the same amount of Galgalim or whatever, but you have to accept a certain very general idea of human knowledge being a real thing, and of it being a good thing, and of it being the good thing, basically those things. Then you need to either say that either you're like a sort of upside down Rambamist, which says, well, the Rambam taught us to value the truth and therefore we don't believe in the Rambam, which is silly, because truth means something in a certain system, in a certain way of thinking, and truth doesn't, I don't know, this is something that needs to be explained. But the point being that if you value truth, in other words, it immediately means you say these things that I just said, that human knowledge is possible and it's good and it's not good, then you really have a problem, a much more serious problem with modern worldview than that it disagrees with the spheres or something. Because this is something they have to realize. This is something that I want to say to all these modern Rambamist people. There's like entire bookshelves talking about this question, and none of them really say this until me, or until some Christian people that say things like this in different contexts. But I don't think any Jewish, I haven't seen almost anyone saying this. But the problem is that all these things in the name of which you're attacking the Rambam, but we could really go to the backwards and say something different. But all these things that you're attacking the Rambam in the name of, but he would say something similar for the backwards things. They also deny these three things. They deny human knowledge as being possible, at least as defined. Again, we could always say that knowledge is just another way of use, and then knowledge is not really a thing, it's just use or technology.
Quine style.
Yeah, like, again, whatever, a lot of style. Doesn't matter. You could say that, but basically there's no such a thing. And you could say that, well, there's not really such a thing as good anyways. Just good is just what you want, like everyone else style, whatever. and then you definitely would say, and this is people definitely say that a long time already before. Nowadays people have said, well, there's definitely no reason to think that intellectual achievement is the good. Maybe it's a good, maybe some people like it and some people don't. Or maybe it's good for some people and not for other people, but definitely not the good or the ultimate most good, or most good in the sense of the thing for which all the other good things are for. And therefore, tying your shoelaces in the right way might just be just as good as knowing everything, because you're doing it in the right way and it's a mitzvah and so on. That's what you say. You could say these things, and obviously you could go back and say, well, now we could just accept. You could play this game. We're like, okay, now we don't have the Rambam's whole mevuchak. We just accept the Bible literally and buy. Problem is that you can't. In other words, you could, but that's not interesting. You just lost something. It's like, I don't have a good mushal for this. It's like, I mean, another way of saying it in the historical way is that, yeah, you could read the Bible like Spinoza wants us to read it when he attacks the Rambam, and he makes precisely these attacks, or almost them. He doesn't have the idea of the Rambam's physics being wrong so much, but he does have the idea of his interpretations being forced. And then you have to understand the Bible the way Spinoza does, which is that it's not very interesting. You see, you can't have these both things. Now, and of course, some people say that. Some people are fundamentalists in the sense of accepting Spinoza's pshat in the Bible and then doing it. And that's the weirdest thing ever I've ever heard. This is another I don't know where I got to this. This is another narrative of modernity, of religion and modernity, where some people say like Spinoza and other people in different ways. Martin Luther, I like saying, well, the Bible doesn't mean anything like you scholastics and so on are telling us. It means something very stupid, and now do that stupid thing. And that part I don't get. Like, if it's stupid, then Spinoza is right. Then the Bible and then intelligence and revelation are totally distinct, and we should go with intelligence, right? The other people, the weird from people, which are like, well, yeah, thank you, Spinoza, for proving me that the Rambam is wrong, and now we will choose what you taught us is stupid. That doesn't add up. To me, it doesn't add up. Maybe some people it does. It's a very strong prior belief that this is what's the truth. We're only trying to deal with the truth, the intellectual truth. Then that sort of makes sense. But in reality, it doesn't make sense, and I think it doesn't make sense for more deeper reasons. In other words, it doesn't make sense. At least if you accept, this is what all these modern Neoplatonists, there should be Neoplatonists, but they're mostly Neo-Aristotelians or Neo-Thomists, keep on telling us, which is that if you don't have the Aristotelian ideas of good,
there's no progress in your system.
And well, which they say, and it's very interesting what they say, which they say is really the only way to make sense of the biblical sense of good. In other words, they really believe in this shidduch of although they don't say that there's not contradictions and problems and so on, but at least in the way it was combined, they really think that religion, in the sense that we inherited it, right? You could be an Iron Age religious person. I don't know. I think that's what a lot of people nowadays are, anyways.
Iron Age.
Iron Age,
Iron Age.
You could be that kind of person. Like, he goes once a year to a temple and he's good with God, and that's all. You could be that kind of person, and I'm sure that some people nowadays are getting there because of the cyclicity of history. But if you want to, but that's not very good. I mean, if you have in other words, the religious narrative of there being a certain kind of progress, right? Progress is a religious narrative. The religious narrative of there being some kind of progress where it's better to have a God which teaches us how to be a good human being than a God that is just a mad God that you have to take care of, which is something like the old image of God that all the Bible critics keep on telling us is what the Bible really says. Then you're sort of stuck with a certain, again, you don't have to be stuck with this, but this is not very interesting. You don't have to be stuck with how many stars there are, but you are stuck. In other words, you are stuck with the dilemma of either having something like what the Rambam says being true in the real sense, not true because the Rambam said it, because it says anywhere. True because the way that makes the most sense for human beings to live is in pursuit of truth, or just being a very stupid person, or you could say things worse than that if you want to believe all kind of reactionary things, like whatever. But at least being sort of a bad, chaotic person. and that includes being a religious person. That's very, very important. And it includes being a fundamentalist religious person which sees this dilemma and chooses the Bible. Because that's just a way of being a bad person. Not only according to the philosophers, according to the Rishonim, according to the Jews, according to the religious authorities. And I think this is true for us, for people like me, that our religious tradition is not. I mean, I know people keep on saying, well, theoretically they tell you that the Tanakh is the thing. Well, yeah, not really. Our religious tradition is the one. Now again, it doesn't have to be in the Rambam style, you could be in the Platonic style or in the Kabbalah style or Chassidus style or anything like that, or Musar style. But all these styles turn out to agree something like this, in the very vague, basic terms. They all turn out to be based on the idea of there being some point of being a good person beyond obeying God. Basically choosing that side in the Yithipro. I don't think there's any other real religious tradition that exists. Besides, you could be a Zionist. That's the only other way, I think. You could be a political Zionist and say, yeah, Judaism is just about conquering a land, having a lot of tanks, whatever. Go on. No, I have a lot of friends that sort of ended up there. It's not even like, and I understand why. It just seems dumb to me. Like, I'm not really interested in that. Why am I not interested? Because I'm Haredi, because I'm Satmar. Like, I believe that Judaism is about Avodat Hashem. It's not about conquering lands. But there's no other reason. But that's, But that's the only other, and Spinoza ends up being a Zionist, sort of like that's where you end up. Ends up being al tzad that the Torah is true. You end up being a Zionist. That's what happens. But I don't think there's another option, and I do think that the Zionist option is a real option. By the way, I mean there's thousands of modern Orthodox and religious Zionists too. That's basically their religion nowadays, because of them accepting all of this criticism. The Haredim Jews are basically Aristotelians. We basically believe, Lakewood, they totally believe only in intellectual virtues and none other. That's basically where we are. Of course, not the distant. So again, we get into Prutim. So on the yeshivas, they say that the smartest thing in the world is Islam. They say the smartest thing in the world. This is already details, and like you say, at that level we could argue, but at least in the general level, there's not really a way out. Then you want to ask, why is the Rambam spending time on explaining that Yecheskel is really signifying Aristotelian physics? Because he thinks that those are the... Well, then you could say different weird things that I don't like saying. He probably sort of somewhat believes it sincerely, for sure. And even in the sense that you have to remember that he's not trying to do historical interpretation. The whole idea of historical interpretation, well, he knew about it, but I'm not really interested in it.
The difference in physics and metaphysics, the difference would be is that if you're experiencing it in a nevuah, the way the Rambam says, how could it be wrong?
But of course it could be wrong. Of course it could be wrong.
Different quality, right?
No. But this I don't know about what nevuah is. In other words, I don't. But one thing that I. No, that's the only half. Okay, no. 1 second. Let's not. But the problem, you see. But this gets into the Rambam's political tricks.
I'm not trying.
No, but this is again. I don't know what it means to believe that Nevi'as Moshe is better than the other ones. Again, if it's an accidental fact of history, then it's not interesting.
No, not an accidental fact.
Qua philosophy, it's interesting. Qua history, we can discuss.
No. It occupies a more important place religiously, right?
No, because the Rambam makes it signify intellectual achievement.
You make a hierarchy whether or not that's a
because it's
fact or not.
Exactly, but that's not an historical hierarchy.
What?
It's not an historical hierarchy.
It's a truth hierarchy.
Yeah, because
Nevuah is
Moshe
still different quality. Not talking about the participants of the Nevuah, so even the content.
Right, but it could be wrong.
Of course, it could be wrong. In
other words, it could be not Nevuah. That's another way of saying it. But
what?
That's one sense of Pasha Sheftim. I love this. Pasha Sheftim is the most Rambam's text in the whole Bible. It says, how do we know that God spoke it? Well, if it's true, that God spoke it. It says a pasuk. You know what I'm talking about? The Chitayimri is like the most important pasuk in the world. It says a pasuk in Pasha Sheftim last week. I remember it. Nobody realized what it's like the most. The Rambam actually doesn't read it this way, but as far as I can tell, this is what it says. It holds the whole drusha. You should only listen to a Navi that tells you, speaks in the name of God. And then it asks this obvious question. How are we supposed to know? Everyone is claiming that God is speaking to them. And the answer is, if it doesn't happen, then obviously God didn't say it. It doesn't. The Rambam makes this maybe some Chazal into like a test that
So you want to use
could
a
realize.
qualifier,
But that's
right?
not what it says. It just says, it doesn't say that you
Well,
become a
well,
Novi MS at some point and then you stop having this problem. So as it says here, anything that it says, if it didn't happen, then it's not Lo Divrei Hashem. And you know, taking this to extreme, you would have to say that if there's a pasuk in Sefer Yeshaya that didn't happen, Lo Divrei Hashem. What do we do with the tradition and all that? That's a problem. But that's just the basic logic. So, in other words, I don't think, and Nevuah again is not a historical thing in this sense. In other words, in the sense there is an historical, he has an historical commitment in the sense of the Jewish community and so on. But those are particular instantiations of a certain social, political ethic. In other words, you would have to have. To be a Jew, you would have to sort of have, and I think Rambam sometimes pretends that this is not in this way, but in this sense, I would, at least I think that this is not possibly defended on entirely universalist terms, in the sense of, I don't know if the Rambam himself would never ask this question in the sense because he never stands outside of himself, but I think the Rambam seems. For example, and again, the Rambam is not interesting in this sense, but he doesn't seem to think that it's so bad to be a Muslim. In other words, he sort of seems to think, and at least in the reality, that's how he thinks, and then he writes these weird things sometimes, and, you know, Anuchas Mashiach and so on. He doesn't think that everyone should become Jewish. He does sometimes. He does think that whatever, but he doesn't. But in other words, his Jewishness is an accidental fact in some sense, even according to his own theory. Which means that, but it does. But there is
in terms of execution, right?
He says that. He says that. But honestly, how true is that? I mean, he knows what actual Judaism looks like, not his theoretical one in his book. I mean, how? Of course, he also knows that the Muslims are killing him, and sometimes they just hate him for no reason. I'm not getting into that. You know, so I saw a Kapach said someone wrote an article that the Rambam. Accepted the idea of jihad from the whatever their name was. No, the guys that actually tried to kill him. The Mujahideen, whatever they were called. I forgot their names. Yeah, whatever, something like that. The Almohads. Now, and they say, well, that can't be. That I'm literally escaped from these people. Well, that doesn't actually follow. I mean, they're actually trying to get everyone to believe in the one God. Of course, they have some weird additions with this shikr is also a prophet and so on. Well, one thinks that it was a shikr anyways. But okay, but in the broad terms, they're right. And the Rambam says, okay, we're going to do the same thing. It's not really crazy. The point is, but then you would have to say it's something like there is a reason for everyone to stay where they are, or something like that. At most, I don't know if there's a really good. In other words, it's not really useful to ask this question. But I don't know where I got to this. The point is, when he's talking about anything particular, there isn't a universal way, by definition, to defend particular things. You have to say the truth is the truth for everyone, and that's it. So what's the question? I don't know. I'm talking too much. I'm gonna let you talk.
What part of position? Now that we know that, now that we don't go to Rambam, so
no. Firstly, we don't know.
What?
Firstly, we don't know. You know too much already. He doesn't know. Okay.
Wow.
The sun might still be circling the earth for all I know. Anyways, well,
that's one way to approach it.
That's a real philosophical way to approach it.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I know he's okay with that.
Assume with the sun circling the earth.
So assume.
No, but assuming that it's not true, like most people assume. Not because they know, because they believe what the science books told them. But anyways, but assuming that I think that this point is important for the Rambam, would be important. But anyways, the point is, assuming that it's not true, the Rambam knew that Moshe Rabbeinu had scientific mistakes. He definitely knew that, and he noted it for Yechezkel. Yechezkel was, there's no real reason to think that Moshe didn't make mistakes that Yechezkel made. He definitely knew that, and he didn't care about it. Now you could give different theories, like what is really going on, like conspiracy theories, but he definitely doesn't care about this. Again, because I would say something like this. It becomes tricky, but what I would say is that the truth that he ascribes to Moshe is not the truth of everything Moshe Rabbeinu thought. It's only the true things that he thought. And he doesn't see prophecy, because he doesn't see prophecy as an external thing for the most part. sometimes he does, but for the most part, he doesn't see it as an external thing. Prophecy is just it's real, but it's not a whole discussion, because all intellection is really some kind of prophecy. But it's not. It's only true to the extent that it's true. And and in other words, what I'm trying to get at is that these historical statements shouldn't be taken as historical statements. They should be taken as truth values of certain statements. In other words, to say that Moshe Rabbeinu is true is really to say that the truth is Moshe, and the things that we accept, we see him saying that are true, are very true, because all important truths are very true. But it's not that this man in this body in this time knew all the truth. I don't think that's the claim that he's making. And I don't think, by the way, I don't think that's the claim that any believers make. I think that they're confused because it's very hard to have correct language. In other words, only a few weird fundamentalists that see this dilemma and say, well, then I believe the false thing. But besides for them, most people, the intuition, or like the sort of fuzzy thing that they really say is that I believe this is true, right? Nobody believes that this is not true. And in other words, this is really why people go on and do like, therefore we must interpret Parshas Bereshis in light of whatever science last week was discovered. But it's not because they're starkly confused, it's because they're how would I say? Confused. No, it's because their commitment to the truth of this is not a historical commitment. Pshat is irrelevant. That's why I don't think anyone ever believed, this is important, and I don't have a good way to articulate it. Nobody ever believed the pshat of the Chumash. Nobody. In other words, to the extent that the pshat is true, it's false. You have to remember. What do you mean by the Ibn Ezra? No, I'm not sure what you mean. No, the Ibn Ezra is he believed that the pshat is true. No, I don't think so.
He tautologizes 15 times in the beginning.
Yeah, no. One second. Yeah, I think that the Ibn Ezra is we can talk. I don't know, but the point is, the Ibn Ezra doesn't count. He's too smart. I'm talking about normal people. And what I'm saying is, nobody ever believed. For example, let me give you an example. I don't know how much Baruch is and so on. This is a problem. In other words, this dilemma. If I try to take it to the philosophical part. Parshas Bereshis, many people have believed literally, for sure, because there's no reason otherwise. But what I'm trying to get at is that nobody really cared at it. The meaning, the commitment isn't defined by I believe whatever it is that some guy in, whatever it was, 3000 BCE believed. Nobody ever defines their belief in that sense. What they sometimes say is that guy knew the truth. So that's very different from saying I'm committed to whatever that guy says. In other words, this is actually the dynamic, right? When we say, well, what it says there is false, we're always going to reinterpret it as to make it true. Not because we're starkly confused. I think many people are starkly confused, but that's not really what the reason is. Because their commitment is to the thing being true and not to the guy saying it. Another way of saying this would be, because we could talk about prophecies, and I think, for example, nobody ever believed Daniel's Ketz in the literal sense, because it has a literal sense. I don't know what exactly it is. What? Daniel's Ketz. Daniel actually knew, well, oh God, I'm going to have to tell you when Daniel lived. I don't know. But in any case, according to whatever, there is some literal pshat of when this Daniel guy existed and exactly what he meant by everything he wrote. And there was also an exact meaning to the date that he gave for whatever he meant that date to be. Okay? Now, at least since a week later, right, which is when Daniel was canonized, because before that it wasn't interesting, nobody believed it, literally, right? There is an historical pshat. I don't think there isn't. I mean, that's just how things work. There was a guy that had these visions or whatever they were and figured out some meaning, and then after 1,370 days or whatever that is, there will be something, whatever exactly things will be. I don't even know. We call it Mashiach, but it's not really his word, whatever it is. Now, a week passed, right? The first guy to read Sefer Daniel was after that. Of course, maybe he didn't realize, maybe he was just stupid and didn't realize that it literally gives a date, And probably if you lived in his context, you more or less understood what it meant. Nowadays, we don't really know the pshat either, but it says something. It says from a certain day, from a day of a certain thing, you count. He gives an amount of days to count, 1,291 days, something like that. You can count. It's not so hard to count days. I mean, it has a very basic meaning. And nobody ever believed that pshat. In other words, nobody that thinks that Daniel is a sacred book believed that pshat. Daniel believed it maybe, but then whenever exactly he did. But anyone after that didn't believe that. So what did they believe? The non-literal pshat, that whatever it is, every week there's a new one. But that's another discussion. But whatever it is, nowadays nobody really cares. But whatever it is, that's what they believed. So now you can't, there's a paradox in saying, well, what did the historical person Daniel believe? What he believed is not religiously significant. That's just history, which is interesting, but it's not historically significant. It's not religiously significant. What's religiously significant is that there's like this text which gets interpreted by people as them being Mashiach. Okay, that's also wrong. That's basically what's really significant. What is the religious importance of texts? Most of Tanakh is not religiously significant, by the way. That's another secret that you learn.
Okay, the genealogy is for sure not. Whatever.
Most of it. But I'm talking too much about Tanakh. But the point is, most of the history is not significant. If you'll discover, if someone, let's say it would be beyond a reasonable doubt, like beyond not only reasonable doubt, beyond any doubt, okay, that in Sefer Melachim it says that King Ochaz was the king of I don't even remember. And truth is that it's the opposite. Whoever it says it is. Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, was Chizkiah's son. Anyways, yeah, something like that. Yeah. Now, I don't remember. But anyway, if someone would come and tell you that it's the opposite, nothing would happen. It's useless. Nobody even heard of this guy, so you don't. Who cares? Whatever. Like. Yeah. Who cares?
I'm just trying to say. So how do you?
Chizkiah and Yashir. That's his between Chizkiah and Yashir. Anyways, so nobody cares, which means that it's not significant. Now, what's significant in the same sense?
When I say it, and I know that someone yesterday said something differently than me, and I'm not just reinterpreting back because I'm saying the truth. But what if? And let's say I'm choshesh. Maybe what if tomorrow someone comes? Obviously, I don't consider that because I don't know what he would come with, right? So, what am I saying? That's what's wrong without history at all. Just using history.
I know, but this is a problem. This is another very general attack on knowledge,
right?
And that's a problem. Like that guy said. Let's sell the knife to the guy. Let's think about the moral problem. This guy. What's his name? Oh, Mickey Abraham, he likes making this joke. It's like someone asked him about abortion and what is the Jewish view, because he's a rabbi, and he says, look, firstly, it's not a halachic problem because we can sell the knife to a guy. So now let's talk about the moral problem. So you have the same problem as me, right? That's basically his point, In other words, halachic problems are very easy to solve. Theological problems are very easy to solve. Let's sell the knife to a guy. I mean, make mechiras yehidi, whatever. That's not a really, understand what I'm trying to get at. That's not a really issue. So, v'yesh laima, that it's a mushal, Okay, goodbye. The Rambam said you're allowed to say it's a mushal and you're a kosher Jew. And if you say that it's not the minig, you'll say that b'shas atchak, yesh lismach. If Cook once said something like that. B'shas atchak, you say mechan the Rambam. Okay, sure. Now you have but now what are you doing with the real problem? Like this is a problem when now you discover that this is a real problem, it's a very old problem, it's not very new. It's not just because last week there was some scientific revolution or whatever, that people realize that we should be less certain in our knowledge. I mean, people have asked this problem for as long as there's people asking about problems. And the teretz says, what's the teretz? They shouldn't be certain. I don't have it around the teretz. They shouldn't be certain in your knowledge. But also that you shouldn't say that therefore there's something better than knowledge, because that's wrong. I mean, you can also play this game, how do I know that?
If
you want.
Paradox type.
Yeah, you could say, you could ask that question.
It is very difficult. I
don't have an answer to that question. I think
but measure confidence in the truth. Right?
I don't have an answer to that question. I do think that you have to, that's why Socrates said he's not a sophist, he's a philosophist. Right? and he's more certain of that in the sense of, and it's not really clear that he does sort of seem to be very sure about this, but that's only, I mean, it's like the same, how do you know that it's interesting to be a good person? That's a general question, just as good question. It's a really good question. There's many people who've realized that it's not real, this whole thing of being a good person.
Epicurus wasn't very convinced of it.
No, that's not true. But
not true?
No.
Why?
Because it's not true. He thought that the good is a pleasure, but he still believed that it's good.
But that's an easy appeal, though.
Even all these Epicures, or all the utilitarians, which are basically Epicureans, they have a good. And who told you that that's, like, who is obligating me to always be consistently pleasure? Like, he also seems very demanding. Like,
utilitarianism suffers from internal problems, but
it doesn't matter, but this is also, like, I don't think, okay, so pleasure is the good. It doesn't seem that people are always running out there. Like, you have to, there's always like an avodah samusar. Even to be a good hedonist, you need to do avodah.
Yeah.
Sadly. Or even to do anything human, you basically need to do avodah. Yeah, it's a lot of work.
I wouldn't be able to do it. I'm too tired.
A lot of work. Exactly. So, but anyways, what I'm saying is you could always do that. But the real questions are more general than this question of, like, well, destroyed Rambam. So destroyed by this debate guy. Totally destroyed, Maimonides. That's not going to help you much. Because you end up with the same question of do we know anything, and is it good to know anything? And if we yesterday thought we know something and now we realize that it's wrong, does that mean we should give up on the project of knowing things? Socrates has explicit dialogue saying all these arguments. I don't know if he has a good answer, but it at least proves that there's nothing very. Everyone seems to think that this is a new problem. I don't know why. This is the only chet that there's a modern chet. Well, actually, it's probably not either. Yeah. That everyone thinks that their problems were discovered, and then, like, people go around talking. What did I see? That was so funny with the EA. This EA guy, he went to the Kaiver of Bentham, I think, and he said this. Oh no, not the Kaiver. There's, like, in one of the states, like where he lives. I don't remember, in England. There's, like, the pub. Said this is where Jeremy Bentham discovered utilitarianism in 17 or whatever. Like, he discovered it, like he digged into the ground somewhere and he found it, like the golden tablets of Joseph Mormon. Like, that's what it sounds like. Hello, you didn't discover it, just guy said something, like, whatever. You don't discover anything.
I think C.S. Lewis called, like, chronological snobbery.
Something like that. That's a stupid thing. So, it's a problem. They're real problems. I don't say that there's an easy answer to them. And maybe in some sense you just make a choice or whatever, but that's the problem, you understand? So therefore, like, let's skip all the smart people, because the stupid people know just as much, because all the smart people until today didn't know some basic thing that we think we know. And that's basically the argument, and in more general terms, right? That's the basic argument, and you have to think about that argument. Maybe it's a good argument. Is it a good argument? And should we skip on the project of being better, or of being smarter, of being wiser? Because it turns out most people who've tried have not succeeded.
That might be the product of smartness, so it might be also paradoxical.
Well, because if we would stop, then we wouldn't know that they didn't succeed, so we might as well be that.
First of all, that. No, it's not even a paradox as a matter of destination, it's also as a matter of initiation.
And I sometimes say that. I mean, okay, so, the alternative to being Rambam Jew or whatever is to be some kind of simple Jew. Okay, now I'm a simple Jew and I believe whatever the Rambam says, and back to square one. You could say that. People often say that, Rambam was disproven, so we're going to be Mekabulim. Well, the Mekabulim were not even disproven because they didn't even try to prove anything. That's not better. Right. So that's the basic thing. If you want to ask a very particular question within a certain system which claims that Nevuah works only by knowing all the truth there is to know, and then make two contradictory claims. One is that knowledge progresses, and the second is that there's some historical person 1,000 years ago had prophecy. Then there's a slight question. I'm not saying there's not a question, but it's a very small question. That's not really the question they're asking. It's an interesting question.
Also the question I was asking.
Yeah, I know, but it's not really. I know what you really mean. It's an interesting question, and there's different answers to it. Like, you could say, well, probably not, but prophecy, the fact that people believe it was a prophet is something useful, and we shouldn't take that away. That's Leo Strauss' answer. Or you say something like that, right?
Yeah.
That probably the biblical prophets were not really real prophets. Probably Aristotle was a more real prophet than them, but it's politically useful to continue saying that they were, so we're not going to take that away from people. Okay, that's one way of saying it. Well, this is the most vulgar way of saying it, but just to make things clear, I like saying them vulgarly. By the way, I guess it's a very vulgar way to say that, but do you have a better solution? Because I don't have a better solution. I mean, it's very easy to be pursuing the truth privately, but let's I mean, it's all easier to talk about different people's religion. I don't know why am I saying this, but I mean, I'm assuming that you think that Jesus was never resurrected, right? Those three ladies that they were just dreaming, right?
I don't know anything about
You people are problematic. I thought. You never heard the story even, right?
Oh, no,
okay.
No, I mean, Jesus' resurrection is not something that I
okay, you don't matter.
No,
I don't think
consequential.
he mattered when he was alive, so it's hard for me to struggle with what happened.
Well,
after.
there was such a guy, right? Probably.
Yeah.
But he probably didn't come back from the dead, right?
Nobody cared for him when he was alive. So
Okay, but he probably didn't come back. Oh, one second.
I'm not concerned.
No, I'm just saying.
The historical.
But I'm just saying. Oh, but wait. Let's assume. Okay, but you could do the same shtick. I know.
Right?
Yeah. So you could say the same shtick. But let's assume that there's some basic things that like a billion people believe supposedly, and it's just nonsense. It's and they have thousands of people making tifa explanations on it, which are interesting for themselves, but they're really based on nonsense. That's what most Jews believe. I personally think I believe that. In other words, I don't have a problem being a basic Jew that thinks that whatever the Muslims and the Christians believe, the stories are nonsense. Whatever, what do I think? But okay, I shouldn't say this because it answers to me, it opens me to a certain problem. But the point is, Muhammad never had a magic horse that flew him wherever, and Jesus never got any wine out of anywhere, and so on, right? Now, it's the Christians that claim that this is the basis of their belief. I'm not the one claiming. I mean, they're the ones that say that if this didn't happen, then we should close down our church, right? At least they claim that. They're not really going to do it. Like just like the Jews are not really going to close down their shul of Christians if they're not doing it. But that's what at least they say, right? No, but let's assume that it's true, that this is a false religion, right? That is really the next, and I think this is a serious question. By the way, I think this is a very serious question. I think most Jews don't have a good answer to this question. And in other words, they have the wrong answer, but thankfully it doesn't matter. He asked Lubavitch Rebbe, says, you should close down your church and you should just do Shabbos Mitzvah. But that's not a real answer. You should not do that. Absolutely not. It's a bad thing to do.
Yeah.
Because whatever this silly little falsehood of there being three gods or whatever it is, it holds up a lot of things, right? That's the conservative argument. But it even without that, you have to think if it's a wise thing to destroy that. Now,
it's a wise thing to destroy it. I think it's a wise thing to adjust it.
Maybe, but now figure out how to do it. The point is you have to figure out how to do it. You could, the one atheist argument that's going to destroy all belief has been done 1,000 times. That didn't help. So obviously that's not the way to do it. Maybe the way to do it is to open McDonald's, but then you end up with McDonald's being the religion, so that doesn't help much either. But what's the answer? I understand. And this is why I don't know that. I mean, when you ask it this way, I don't know that anyone has a smarter answer than what Strauss claimed Plato says. You work with what people believe and you try to make them slightly better within that framework. And that's the Rambam. The Rambam says that openly about Avodah Zarah, about Moshe Rabbeinu. But anyways, I don't know where I got to this. But the point is that it's not a crazy thing. But then you ask, therefore you have to write a whole book explaining how Yecheskel Hanavi meant this, really? Maybe you do. Yeah, maybe you do. Or maybe you could have a lot of different fancy answers to that, but that's why I'm going to go back to the real thing, which is that's not the real problem. It's a very minor problem. Why would Rambam even need Moshe Rabbeinu to have real Neviah? Why is it important for him?
Well, it would be important with him.
He doesn't need it. He doesn't need it. All the truth that he believes in is rational truth, right? They ask him, well, didn't you write that you also believe that Moshe? Yeah, but what I meant was that Moshe also believed this rational truth, right? So, well, it turns out he didn't. Okay, well, what do you want from me? I mean, it's a certain kind of level of question, but I don't see that it's a real big question for him.
It's a question for him why he's engaging with the tradition. That's the only question, right?
Yeah, but he knew and the answer is that he knew the people that tried not to, and he didn't like them. He actually knew those people. It's not like there were no free thinkers in the Muslim world, and the Ram actually read them and he didn't like them at all. because he thought that they're too
Doesn't go unchecked.
yeah, they're big too. They have too much gava. They take themselves too. They think they're way smarter than they really are. And that's still true.
And even for Rambam, the possibility that Moshe Rabbeinu thought the same thing that he did is probably sufficient reason to engage with it, right?
I'm not sure where you think he's engaging with it.
Not the historical figure. I'm saying is the fact that for him, the Bible might be thinking of the world, at least in the important ways that he thinks, the same way that he is, right? Or at least share some commonality. It's important for him to engage with that book. Right.
Look, I could try to make as strong as I could a claim that it's true that I'm pshat in the Bible, and people have done that. That's not the point that I'm saying.
Not the pshat. Not
it could be starkly true.
I'm not talking about
well, as far as I know, maybe not in this language. Again, you could say.
It could even be a pragmatic consideration. It could be that the learning the Torah for Rambam is help. He sees it as not only helpful, but it's the same reason. Maybe not the same reason why. Maybe in a different sense, but in a similar way as him learning at the right?
No, but it's not. But that's not true. But that's not true because
the Bible has an additional benefit.
But that's not true. There's a big problem. Right? No, but there's a big problem with this. There's a big problem with this because Avicenna, whoever it is, at least explains you what he's saying. And from reading the Bible without Avicenna's Perish, without the Rambam, which is putting him into it, you don't know the truth. I think that the Rambam, you have to realize, and this is the real question. But I don't have an answer for that question. In other words, it's just a fact. The Rambam basically doesn't want you to read the Bible without his Perish. He doesn't think that it's a good idea.
No, he doesn't.
He actually thinks it's a bad idea. It's a dangerous thing.
Don't think about the Bible too much or too little, right?
I don't say that he says that, but he definitely thinks, he says this openly, that you should not read. Well, you could read it, but as long as you don't believe it.
No,
that's what he says.
If you read it with the Perish,
literally.
If you read it with his Perish,
don't believe it literally.
Useful tool. Okay, maybe if not nothing else, definitely grounds it in the authority of the Bible, right?
Again, well, that's playing political games, trying to help people. That's a very good thing to do.
Right.
But if you ask about the truth, he doesn't actually derive much truth from the Bible. I think this is the very this is
right. Right. It's not a derivative, right? It's not a scholar.
He doesn't really learn anything. Almost anything. It's hard to say anything. It's hard to believe that really don't learn anything. But almost anything important, he doesn't learn from it. He learns from other sources. Maybe his idol already told him that this is also what the Bible means, so he believes that. But it doesn't really come from there. And I don't think he doesn't know that. He's met other Jews. He goes to shul. Not all of them. Maybe he has a group of people that yeah, but he also goes to shul. He knows the people. It's not like he's not totally confused about reality, but he just thinks that it's not important. And really, it's really not important. At least for people that think in the Rambam's way, in the most basic, like I said, he makes it a mitzvah to read Aristotle. Now, does he think that that's an historically honest representation of this mitzvah? Yeah. No, I don't think so. But I also think that he would think that this question is a very bad question.
Right.
Because, he wouldn't say this, but I would say it. And your tefillin is an historical representation of Moshe Rabbeinu's tefillin. Come on.
Right.
But he would say, you could always make the chalikim that you're trying to make. Like, well, Moshe Rabbeinu still cared about knowing God. Well, he didn't know him as well, or didn't know these exact details as we do. So therefore, we could interchange these things. But really,
it might just be a conservative move.
I think that the shidduch really happens for him, but I don't think that the accidental parts of historical truth retain any importance in themselves because of this shidduch, and because of the shidduch that happens really for everyone, for whatever they believe. That's what I think.
Right. For Aquinas, it's definitely more important. Like, I'm curious what the Thomists think. Because, like, for Aquinas, these are very important things.
No, one important thing for mostly even Thomas Aquinas and definitely all of the rest of the Christian tradition is that they don't actually believe in. You basically can't be a Christian, at least not a Western Christian. You basically can't be a Christian and really believe in human knowledge.
Right.
as the end. That's why a lot of Jews also don't believe in that. The Rambam definitely does. In other words, if as in the moment you have this little thing that says that salvation, which is sort of an add-on to the human, being a complete human or whatever, is not possible humanly, then you actually really, in some sense, lose the ability to do any of this. Right? In other words, I think that this is a real problem. I mean, again, Luther really realized this problem. Those people dropped everything else, and I don't think this is true for Judaism or Islam. Christians are the most irrational of the big three religions, and they're explicitly so. They're not ashamed of this. It's not like
Aquinas isn't.
Yeah, he is. He is, because in the end of the day, he doesn't think that God is touchable by theology.
Right. Absolutely. Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
He doesn't think that a human being. He doesn't think. Another way of saying it is, doesn't think that Aristotle's in heaven. Well, some people said there were ways of getting Aristotle into heaven in the medieval ages. Maybe he was secretly, or unconsciously, whatever. But you have to make him an unconscious Christian, or you have to make Christ redeeming him limafre, whatever it is. You can't have it simply just by getting to the Rambam explicitly has Aristotle in heaven. I mean, it says beferish Hilchos Shiva. Aristotle is in heaven. And Rambam's heaven, which is Aristotle, but he's in heaven. Meaning to say, whatever that symbol. Right? This is why we can't. This is very important. We can't take out the symbol from what it symbolizes. Like you have to. If I say the word heaven is a Christian word, but olam haba, right? You have to. You can't take this. I mean, we live in this world. That's really the real reason why it's still true. I mean, why it's still relevant, like Yechazkel and so on. I think we live in Yechazkel than the Rambam, but we still have olam haba, and when you believe that this is, I really think that when you believe things like this, the identifications become automatic. Because olam haba, like you see me talking here, because to go to olam haba means to achieve whatever the goal is to achieve. That's what it means for everyone, basically. It's just that everyone has a certain vision of what that goal is, but that's the truth for everyone. So there's not really a way. Once you have a certain language, that's just how language happens. I mean, even philosophical technical language tends to inherit and twist normal language, and you'll ask the same question. Well, why did they do that? Because there's no other language. The Rambam's entire theory started with a theory about language having double meanings and being borrowed from basic language, but from physical language to abstract language. And that theory is actually sort of Aristotle's theory, for where he gets all of his words. Also, you have to remember, it's also even this thing of how we must take regular words and make them into mean something that they don't mean is actually what all philosophers do. So again, this is a problem that you could sell the life to a guy and then have the problem as a philosopher, as a human and not as a Jew, right? In other words, is it possible to think of what did I say? What do we call it in these the ultimate good or something like that without thinking heaven? Not really possible. In other words, it's going to mean you're going to change the meaning of heaven, but that's going to still be the words that you use, and it's also not possible to speak without speaking English or whatever language you were taught as a child and so on. It's not. That's the real. Not another thing.
It's very beneficial to know two languages. I think it does. Knowing more than one language, I think, is helpful in understanding that the organization of concepts is a
yes, a little bit, but you're still thinking one of them. In other words,
my favorite thing is the French people.
You still think in one of them.
One of these thinkers said,
or all of them, but sometimes
one of these thinkers decided to prophesize that that which language is it? That French is going to be the language of science, and that German is going to be the language of literature. Why? Because French lends itself to the truth. It speaks the truth. Why? Because the language follows the order of the thoughts, right? The Gallic lucidity is higher, whatever. Because why? Because in French it follows the language. It follows the order of the thoughts.
It could be. It's not. I'm not even convinced that this is not true.
Maybe,
see, I know. You're too sure that it's not. Maybe it's true. Maybe French is the correct language, and we should all speak French.
It's definitely true for French people. That's what I'm saying.
No, it might be universally true. Just that we're thinking. Maybe we're thinking wrong.
Maybe.
Anyways, yeah, that's another discussion. That also, it's still, Yeah, so again, like like you say, like the goal of philosophers is to get like the universal human language, which is yeah, we could try. I don't disregard that as the correct goal.
One second, I understand.
It's true. You can't. You have to steer. That's why stopping at the particular is giving up on wisdom again. Because the goal is going to be to stop thinking in English. You need to stop in the way the universe is organized. You need to think in the way the universe is really organized. That's why the Rambam, again, nobody disagrees, that he doesn't really think that what Yechezkel means is the important question. The important question, the only question is why he's doing it this way. And for that, it's just as good as a question as to answer the question why is he doing it in Arabic, or why are you doing it in English?
Right, it's just an effort.
Of course, we're trying to get English beyond English. And maybe there's even some languages that are better than others. Maybe, I mean, everyone likes to believe that theirs is the best. I mean, yeah. Maybe Judaism is better than doing it than other languages. Maybe I'm not even,
I'm definitely inclined to think so.
Again, in the like I said, living in the Christian world Judaism is better. In this sense, at least, Jews are way more universalist than Christians. Although the Christians pretend to otherwise, but if you speak to a real Christian, not like a fake one from New York, you'll find out very quickly.
That what? That it's more particular.
Yeah.
In what sense?
Because they really believe that we're all going to hell. You have to remember.
That doesn't make it particular or universal.
Yeah, it's the most particular. That's the worst thing you could say. I mean, that's the most wrong philosophical thing you could say.
It might be wrong, but I'm not quite. Why is that particular then?
Because the only way for a human being to be a human being is by accepting our guy. It's like Apple saying the only way you could have a phone is by buying an Apple phone. That's a very particular statement. It's not true.
Okay.
Maybe they're monopoly that they bought all the phones and now there's no other phones they bought, but you could buy a different phone.
Right. Okay, but
and it's a monopoly. They have a monopoly on truth.
The particularism of Christianity, at least the one that's important to me. Sorry, the
Jews don't claim to have a monopoly on truth.
What? Right. Okay.
Very important, by the way. It's a chalek tanum. But anyway, the Rambam passes like this. No, about Chasidim Masolim go to Elam.
Oh, okay.
Chalek Taseft and Sanada and the Rambam passes this way. Okay, but anyways, he does. What should I do? He does.
But
he does. He thinks that this one is right. What does Paskin mean? Same thing it always means.
Okay. No, Paskin's a legal word. It's just funny to use it out of okay, maybe it's borrowed language. No, okay, but to me, the particularism, the universalism of Christianity is that its truth is available in spite of.
Yeah, but that's very. Thank you very much for selling Apple in China. I mean, that's not the point. The point is that according to the Jews, you don't have to buy the Apple phone at all.
Right. Okay.
So it's universal because it sells itself to everyone. But it also says that you must buy me.
Okay, but it universalizes things that Judaism keeps particular, like action, right? The Christians, the more.
Because we don't care. We don't care. In other words,
Judaism, to me, what's admirable
unless you're like the Rambam or
is that you have to do particular things. It maybe lets you be more universal because you can approach it from.
Yeah, but the Goyim don't have to do those. That's the main point.
What?
Nobody that's not.
The Goyim don't have to do it, but I think it's important for Judaism.
And it's fine. It's not
approach the universal from a particular point.
This is a discussion, but the pshat of
you can accomplish the same thing without doing this.
Yeah, right. Action. The pshat is that some people would claim that otherwise, and maybe in some sense it's true. I mean, if some halachas are just the expression of what's the moral truth or whatever, but not all of them are, right? If a guy doesn't make bris milah, there's nothing wrong with him. I mean, sometimes we pretend that there is, but it's problematic. But in general, we don't believe that they should, and we don't believe that anything, not missing anything. They're going to go to maybe there's a different Jewish heaven. I don't know, but Pashta, I mean, people try to say things, but at least. In general, that's what the Jews
right, but
think.
We also approach the universal from.
At least the Jews nowadays, who knows what the Jews really think?
Right, but the thing is, I find Christianity to be, in some sense, counterfeit universalism for the reason that what you're saying. I don't think you could be universalist without being a particularist first. Because then you end up narrowing it at the end instead of the beginning.
Yeah, you're speaking riddles.
For Yadis, right, you start
speaking riddles.
Okay, it's like for Yadis, you start off with particular actions, right, and then you explain how the results of those particular actions are achievable in broader means, right?
No, ich weiß nicht. Speaking Yiddish. No, tell me what you mean.
Okay, let me think how to organize this well. For Christianity, you say everybody is capable of salvation, but then only the people that achieve it are retroactively part of the program.
It's not clear that they say everyone is capable, but that's another machlokes. Okay.
Well, the Calvinists and whatever. Okay, but ignoring Calvin. Calvin's a weird guy.
Okay, no.
No, but I'm saying is...
They really say nobody is capable. You have to first...
Okay.
It really starts over there. Nobody is capable.
Right.
Only God is capable. That's what really what I was talking about. The universal power is not important. The important part for me is that nobody can, and that's the Jews are generally more optimistic. I mean, we recognize human weakness and so on, but don't make that into like the basic truth of everything, where nobody is capable. And that means, for our purposes, what that means is that the basic frame of Judaism allows you to be a radical rationalist, like the Rambam sort of is, or like Rav Sadigun is sometimes, where you say that everything accessible through revelation is also accessible through human knowledge.
It's like
for a Christian, that's impossible. No Christian will ever sign on this language because of this whole Jesus thing, which is by definition, that's another thing, which is by definition a historical, sort of contingent historical fact, which is very weird also.
Right. I mean, I think the people that are obsessed with using Lashon Kodesh for everything, like, the people that when you mention it to them again after a few years are very shocked by the fact that you could say Shema in English, right?
I told you, Rabbinim Abshishcha, Rabbinim Abshishcha said that he thinks that all the Mekabbalim don't understand the Kavanas of Krishma, because he had a Mekabbalim explain the Kavanah and told him, well, now explain it to me according to English, or whatever, Polish, because it's halacha, it's Mekalish, that's not the Kavanah, right?
Right, yeah, it's a Simcha, right?
Yeah. Okay, that's enough, Sharon. More than enough.
Yeah.
I'm supposed to say something else. I mean, Mitzvah Hashem. Okay.
Wrapping up.
What?
Okay.
What happened with my thing? What am I doing here?
I did for a while, like